Hi, and welcome to Conversations About Money. I'm Sarah McCrum, and today I'm in conversation with Marilyn Hamilton. Marilyn's been on my radar for a few years. She pops up all over the place. That's how I see her. She sends me messages, she shows up in courses, but what I've been aware of all the time is that she has a very deep interest and knowledge about cities. I've never been much of a city dweller. I lived in London a little bit, but I'm right in the countryside here. But I think that there are some really important questions that we can explore around cities and money and value and the future, because really the future is what's important now. Whatever we've been doing in the past, we know enough to know that it's not going to work well for the future. So that's the context in which I'd like to place this conversation. It's an exploratory conversation on both sides. We haven't prepared for this. We're bringing our enthusiasm and expertise together, kind of really right on the edge of the unknown, I would say. So Marilyn, welcome. And would you like to just start by telling us a little bit about your interest in cities and what brought you to that, a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. And your work has been intriguing me for a long time, as you mentioned. So that's why I keep popping up. But my connection or my service to the world relates to cities. I'm the author of the Integral City book series, the website, and I've been thinking about the city in terms of a new paradigm for probably 2 decades. And the paradigm is defined as a living, complex, adaptive human system that's evolutionary and holistic. So I use the word integral to describe the holistic aspect of it. And my background comes from working with human systems at different scales. So starting out with developing individuals, then leaders and teams and organizations, and then sectors and communities. And somewhere along that way, I learned or determined that the patterns of development at each scale were very similar. That was before I understood complexity theory and fractals, but once I dived into that, I could see, oh, that's why, because the patterns that are made by basically human systems, starting with individuals and growing as we aggregate. So when I started working with communities, there was a still small voice that nudged me and said, well, now look at cities. And so I was a little reluctant to begin with, but then I decided, well, I don't build cities. My husband was an engineer. He does that sort of stuff. I don't work with the bricks and mortar, but I do work with people. So I'll look at cities as if they were complex adaptive systems. And of course, I think they are. That's the conclusion that I came to. So I've by opening that door, at first I thought, oh, I went back to school and studied the complexity theory that underlies this, and really felt I could go knock on the front door of City Hall and say, I've got a new way for you to look at the city. And they weren't very interested. So I,
What a pity.
I withdrew because some of my mentors have taught me not to create antibodies that are going to work against me. So I withdrew, and I have worked all these years with what I call the 4 voices of the city: the citizens, the civic managers, the business innovators, and the third sector or civil society. And what I discovered by working with those voices, and those voices I learned through biomimicry, through the honeybees, as how they use those roles to create their sustainability and regenerativity. And I've always wondered, what would be the equivalent of what the honeybees must produce every year in order to sustain and regenerate themselves? And every hive produces about 40 pounds or 20 kilograms of honey. So that's been my question. What is the equivalent in human systems of that 20 kilograms of honey? Because that's, I think, in terms of regenerativity, goes to the heart of the matter. That enables the honeybees not only to sustain the hive, but it regenerates renewable resources every year for next year because they're pollinating their ecoregion. They're supposed to be the most intelligent species of the invertebrates, and we're supposed to be of the vertebrates. So there I am this morning with you, asking somebody who probably has some really interesting ideas for us to explore. What's the equivalent of our 20 kilograms of honey?
Well, it's interesting because my question in response to that doesn't go to the 20 kilograms, like the measurement, but it's actually what's the honey? Also, because I think that that both of those questions are really important. And when I say what's the honey, where my mind goes to is around value. Because it's not just what do we produce, but what do we produce that's valuable, and in what context is it valuable? As human beings, I think we know the feeling of producing something that isn't valuable. Many people are engaged in work that they know in their hearts isn't really valuable and doesn't matter. Many people are also engaged in work that they know doesn't really do any good to people. In fact, may be harming people even. And then there are people who provide all kinds of services that are really fundamentally valuable for all of us. And then, of course, there's the whole area of life, let's say, that we haven't really valued yet and we ignore. And therefore, we get some really disastrous problems which affect both cities and affect the countryside, because simple things like we value dead trees, we don't really value living trees. We value everything for its commodity value, but you use the word living systems. We haven't easily valued living systems. We value little bits of systems when we cut them up into pieces and turn them into things that we think is human creativity. So for me, that's the honey question. And then we've got the 20 kilos as well. I think that's a pretty interesting question for us to start with.
Yeah, and you're quite right. I mean, I don't think that we're not honeybees, we're human beings. And I think, you know, when I heard James Lovelock, who is the author of the Gaia Hypothesis, being interviewed, and the interviewer was really listing all the terrible things that humans had done to Gaia, to Earth, and she said, "I guess you don't value humans very highly." And he said, on the contrary, humans are Gaia's reflective organ. And I went, oh, yes, okay, there we go. And I think the cities are the organs. Our organizations are like organelles, and our individuals are like the cells in those organs. So I feel like he captured the essence of living system, and that Gaia has evolved us to be her consciousness. And so consciousness and culture is something I keep bringing as great values of cities could not exist without them.
So interesting. There are so many things that I want to branch off into immediately, but I must just mention one thing in the context of Gaia, because a couple of years ago, I was in a studio with my friend Gary Malkin, who's an incredible musician. And he said, "Sarah, will you record something where you're speaking as Gaia?" And so I sat, I'd never even thought about something like that before. And I sat there in the little voice studio, and he played the piano and I spoke as Gaia. And I'll actually share the video of that beneath this, because it's so relevant. And the message that came across more strongly than anything else is that from Gaia's perspective, the thing that we can best do as human beings is contribute to the beauty of where we are. Gaia, first of all, we're part of it. We're not separate from it. We are exactly like you said. And she says, "You are an expression of me."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then she says, "Just contribute to my beauty." It's because it's her beauty is our beauty. It's all the same thing. And it's so simple. She says, "You know how to do that, every single one of you." She said, "Every single one of you knows love. You know how to love in your heart, in a simple way, not in a complicated way. And you know how to create a little bit of beauty." And that's really the thing.
Yeah. It's such an essence. And so a couple of things that come up for me as you say that. One of the ways that philosophers have used the integral or holistic frame as beauty, truth, and goodness. So that's another way to look at,
Oh, wow.
what's
I've sometimes written about money and said money is a way to share beauty, truth, goodness, and beauty. Yeah, the same words. I really see that fundamentally that's what money is. It's a way for us to share goodness, truth, and beauty.
Yeah. So that's something that I'm trying to explore how to do that at different scales and different expressions has also led me to the challenge that we face with any human collection is governance. And so, when I think about the value of cities, most human beings actually do live in cities. And in the developed world, 90%, that's how high it is of humans are living in cities. And in the developing world, it's more than 50%. So by 2050, 70% of the world will live in cities. So there we can say we've congregated well in old terms, but what if we reframed it to say, that's actually where the most beauty, goodness, and truth has the possibility of expression. But how do we then relate that back to the whole, to the regenerative cycle? That would be, in relation to the money being representations of beauty, truth, and goodness. How do we manage to not only look at the cities, but in relation to their bioregion? So I look at that as part of the whole as well.
And then it becomes part of the relationship between the city and around the city, because this whole topic of relationship comes up time and time and time again these days, that the fact that we're somehow in relationship with life and with every part of life, and therefore we need to be better at doing relationships, at relating. So how to see that in a practical context of yes, how does a city relate with its bioregion? That's fascinating. Just this last few days, where my closest city, Brisbane, has flooded really seriously, and then all our main roads were flooded in sections. And I saw somebody posting a photo from a supermarket 2 days ago, out in, well away from the city, with completely empty shelves. I've never seen that. It's hard to imagine in Australia. And it made me realize how very close the system sits to a real disconnectedness. Like, really, we've just suddenly got disconnected by some rain, which is quite extraordinary if you think about it. And then the shops that are locally supplied, their shelves are full.
Yes. Well, there's several things that come up for me. The Indigenous people always say, all my relations, right? It's an invocation that they have as a greeting and a closing and a encompassing and embracing. So I think this is a really powerful reminder for us, all my relations. I used to, back in, if you remember Y2K, that was a long time ago now, but I did, remedial work for that in IT and community. And at that time, I became really aware of supermarkets only have 3 days supply of food. That's all they have in a city. So that's how short the supply chain is. And so this isn't a surprise when those shelves get bare. And where are they going to get resupplied again? So we're becoming aware of how fragile is some words that people are using, how vulnerable we are. But you're going back to your relations. We're really as strong as our relationships are. And that's between people, between other living systems, between any of the stuff we've manifested in the city. It's all relational. And certainly to Gaia, utterly, completely, and totally relational.
Yes, and the floods have shown us that, because you just question how it could be that in a country that does flood, we all know it floods, how it could be that we could actually think that we could plan cities and towns in places like floodplains, or on rivers that need to be able to overflow because that's the nature of the system. Like, I don't think it's necessary for us to fully understand why we did that. What I think is necessary is for us fully to explore what kind of governance and decision-making and wisdom is required for us to be in a right relationship with nature, rather than that relationship that it just is clearly, it doesn't function if people's houses are destroyed.
Yeah.
Like, okay, random things from time to time, but when it's a known risk, it doesn't make any sense. And what, you know, when you talked about cities as organs, I trained for many years with Chinese masters, like 22 years. And whilst I never studied TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, or any of the formal techniques like that, I did Qigong, but I picked up a lot along the way. And what's so fascinating is anything to do with Chinese energy understanding, you're always thinking about organs. We used to talk about our organs all the time. Like, I can feel when my kidneys are under pressure, or there's something going on with my liver, and because I've been used to that. But the thing that came to me when you said the word governance is, I always remember when I used to have acupuncture, my acupuncturist saying, your heart is your governor, your heart is the leader. And, you know, she always used to talk to me about needing the right protection around my heart that could open when it needed to, but was also able to protect me from being hurt. But this idea about the heart being the governor is actually very interesting in today's context, isn't it?
It's beautiful, because I wanted to tell you that I've been influenced by many integral thinkers, including Aurobindo in India, and he always, one of his injunctions was that we needed a karma yoga, a yoga to live by. And I thought, oh, you know, one of the things I've come to hold as a possibility for city governance is that it's related to care, related to the heart. We must care for ourselves so we can care for others. Together we can care for our places, and all together we care for the planet. So the caring for self, others, place, and planet came to me as what would happen if we made our decisions through that alignment? Is that possible then? We would be in right relationship. And so it is a karma yoga I practice every day. When I get up, when I finish the day, how have I been in caring for self, others, place, and planet? Sounds easy. Actually, it's quite a challenge. It just has made me realize the extent to which I either don't think about those relationships, or, oh, when I do think about them or act from them, then life is much fuller, much more buoyant, not just balanced, but buoyant.
And you'd have to agree with it. You could add to it or something, but you couldn't say, oh no, our society would be better if we don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is very beautiful. It's simple, and it's natural, and it's human, and it relates to nature as well. So it doesn't exclude the natural world. And it's something that all of us, we all grew up being cared for to some extent. Even people who are very badly parented, I think, will have had experiences of being cared for in their life. I was wondering the other day, I was thinking about how would it be, I was thinking about countries, really, governments, but it could equally apply to the city. How would it be if we invested in our citizens? Because really, it's the people who create the value that creates the economy. So how would it be if we invested in them? At the moment, we really, I think, the system has become something where the citizens pay taxes in order to fund the government, and then when the government runs out, they go and they issue some bonds and they borrow money from their citizens. It's always like the citizens are the ones with the money, and they're kind of having to support the government. But supposing it was, we had this notion that we invested in our citizens, their well-being, in a big kind of holistic picture of well-being, the well-being of our society, and that would naturally include our environment. And then from the profit, from the benefit of that investment, the city or the country grows and the people grow. And what a different model that is from the model that's based on a notion of taxation. Now, I'm not an economist, and somebody could probably sit here and argue with me, oh no, you couldn't possibly do that, Sarah, because the economy doesn't work that way. But human beings work that way. We work better, I find we work better when we do less wasting money and less spending money and more investing money. It doesn't have to be in a portfolio, but I could invest in learning rather than spend my money on passing time or entertaining myself with something that doesn't matter very much. I can invest in my quality of life rather than feeding some hungry craving that I have that's not going to do any good. So the notion of investment is a really interesting one. And I'm sure that if the notion is good, there is also a way of doing it.
Yeah, I think that relates a lot to regenerativity. So that, and what I hear you doing is talking about investing in values that are life values, life-giving values, and that is a cycle in and of its own. Sarah, is it okay if I mention the valuing system that you shared with me? Because I really was interested in your rethinking about valuations for farmers and soil and air and water. And I could understand how that would work for agriculture. And that I always say to people in the city. And notice the first culture was agriculture. And so it's still what we depend on for our food, but to do it in a living systems way instead of in the heavy industrial, just, you know, looking at it as commodities as opposed to living systems that need their own process of care. So if we were trying to find how to do that with cities, I was thinking about economics and some of the circular economic systems and even donut economics, because I was looking, the accountant in me was saying, so where would we start with our valuation system? What would be the base value? And I think, so I was thinking, well, the interesting thing about donut economics is that it has social justice in the center, and then it has the world's boundaries outside. So it has a very nice ratio of being able to say, this city is doing a good job at having a living economy that's regenerative. And so that was one of the possibilities I was thinking from an economics perspective. And some of the other ways that we look at the consciousness and culture, I have a GPS of city intelligences. I was thinking, oh, I wonder if we could use that as kind of, could we set a baseline and see how it changes as we measure increases in the capacity for regenerativity or increases in livingness.
Well, maybe if I explain just briefly, at least, what that was that I shared with you,
that would be great.
We could kind of look at that together. What I shared with Marilyn was a description of a business that, as we speak today, we're very close to launching, that is called Love2. And the fundamental, so what Love2 does is we've produced financial products, a new type of financial product that is backed by, it's backed by what we could call living assets. So it's backed by improvements in ecological condition. Therefore, for example, when people regenerate land as farmers, they create a value, they create benefit for all of us. By doing that, they improve the soil, they improve the quality of the air, they prevent pollution and runoff, so they improve our water systems, they improve our health and well-being. So the value goes way beyond their fence. It's a common value, and that is a value that hasn't been valued by our financial system. So this is all done by people who do it because they love to, and that's why Love2 is called Love2, because we actually look at the things that people love to do that create value for all of us. And then we found a system to value that. And instead of, there's a really important point in here. So we start from the principle that life is sacred and that nature is, the value of nature is infinite. It can't be chopped up into pieces and then value put on the items. You can't say a tree is worth this much, because a tree exists in an ecosystem, and without the ecosystem, it might not even survive. Just the same as you can't really say a human being is worth this much on their own, because we exist within ecosystems, both human and natural. So we didn't go down that road, which most people go down, is like, how much is a tree worth and how much is a blade of grass worth? Because it just doesn't work. But what we decided to do is look at what we can measure. And I'm thinking we could start from here and look at how that applies in a city. So what can we measure? We can measure improvement in ecological condition. We can also measure when a pristine environment is preserved, is protected, and doesn't devolve, doesn't degenerate. So we measure the improvement in ecological condition. That's kind of verifiable, accountable, auditable, all of those kinds of things. There are systems for doing that. Then the way we put evaluation on it is we look at, so what's the value of the work that farmers and land managers have done to create that improvement? We all understand how to value work. We kind of have a notion of, yes, I had to do a lot of work to do that. That was really worth something. So we value that. And then the other big thing that we do, which is very important for this, normally environmental projects can't attract big investment because they're too small. They're not scalable. They're not built for scale. They're not auditable. They don't have like proper standards for, valuation methodologies and all this kind of stuff. They don't have the governance standards. They don't have the things that financial institutions need to be able to invest at scale. If we want to move the needle in terms of how we treat our land and manage our land, then we have to do things at scale. We can't just rely on a beautiful project there in Brazil that I've seen in a film and another beautiful project here. We have to be regenerating land really a big scale. So we need to make it work. And that means we need big investment into it. So we find these people who are doing amazing stuff and we aggregate them together. We aggregate the values. So instead of having lots of little things, little projects that have had a value put on them, we aggregate the value of all of them so that we then have one very big value. And we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars at a time, so really significant value. Then we can turn that into an asset, which gets turned into a financial product. We have shares and options, like traditional financial products that can be placed, listed on stock exchanges and sold in the market. So we don't have to wait for the markets to change before we can do this. We can use the current system in order to simply shift what we value towards what we describe as the things that are necessary or essential for life. We value what's essential for life and necessary for life. Fresh air, clean water, living soil, healthy human beings. And fundamentally, what we've done is create a model that we're starting by applying to regenerative farming, but it applies to people exercising because they improve health and well-being. And that benefits them, their family, their employer, their country, their national health system, whichever way you look at it, it's a benefit. It applies to people who protect us from disasters. So for example, in Australia, we have a lot of really serious bushfires, but there are people who know how to manage the land to prevent bushfires, or at least to prevent them from being catastrophic. That's extraordinarily valuable, but isn't valued. It's done by volunteers. So wherever we can find value that's valuable for life, we now have a methodology for putting a genuine value on that and then being able to attract investment. So it makes it possible to do much, much more of it, and it rewards the people who actually do the work. So if we start to look at a city there, probably you're the person who would have all kinds of ideas and questions like, well, could we do it for that? Could we do it for that? And that would be quite an interesting place to go, I think.
Yes, I think so, because as you explain that, and it's lovely to hear you explain, I had read it, but it has even more energy as you encompass the whole living system that you're embracing. And I kept thinking, well, cities start someplace. So when you think about the traditional way that a city started, it usually it's always situated in some kind of a bioregion. And we had to extract our living capacities from the bioregion. Unfortunately, the word extract became actually a way of doing it that is not regenerative. And so I think that asking the questions that you're asking and using the kinds of valuations that you're thinking about in living systems for agriculture and for farmers is something that I'd love to look at for work and within cities, because some of the work that we do is not generative, and some of it is life destroying instead of life giving. But we don't measure that or take that into consideration. And I feel like it is that we're being called to do that now. I said 2022 was going to be the year that I wanted cities to create regeneration hubs.
Yes.
So,
well, yeah. And what's really important, I think perhaps what's very beautiful about the opportunity we have here is we don't need to penalize the people who are not doing it. So we don't need to say conventional chemical heavy, pesticide heavy farming is bad. We're going to penalize you for doing it. And anyway, governments don't do that. They very often subsidize it. So they actually support the very industry that does so much harm. But what we can do, and what this model does, is make regenerative farming instantly more profitable than conventional farming. So we use the traditional motivator in a way, profit, and making a more successful business to support people, not only who are doing the right thing, but who would like to, and then they can follow. And of course, but we're able to work with some of the best farmers in the world. They've the best regenerative farmers in the world. That's where we're starting. And they're the people who have the best knowledge. So we can then use that knowledge also to help the next generation do it well, rather than go through the kind of learning curve. Because so often in farming, especially the more regenerative and organic sides of farming, the skills die with the farmer. And that's such a waste of human experience. So that's something that we feel really strongly about, is also being able to pass on that experience quickly so that we can move the needle. Again, this was always from the very beginning about moving the needle. So yes, totally, like food is such an integral part of life, and the flow of food through a city is so important. We're seeing the importance also through COVID of having food locally supplied, because definitely the places where there was more local food supply fared better. I had clients in America who said, oh, we can't get these products, we can't get those products. They just couldn't get things anymore. We didn't experience that here in Australia. Everything was available. Now there might be many reasons, but it so much makes sense that we have that local, I mean, just security, food security, apart from anything else.
Yes, it's like a return to recognition of how integral food is to the city. I think it's one of the key supply chains that once you look at that, it opens up so many questions, and relating to everything like the social justice, even Earth's boundaries, because all of that is contributing to most of the ways that we either grow food, move food, distribute it, and use it. And even one of the things I think I would relate to with what you're saying is not having to penalize people. When I start to work with a place, I'm always looking for the energy. That's the first thing I look for. Is there energy for change? If there's no energy for change, I really don't think I can be of much value to those people. But if there's energy for change, we can start anywhere and see where it wants to lead. And always inviting people to say, well, who else should be in this conversation? Who else should be here? And we grow it in a very generative, relationship-based way. And I always am looking for those 4 voices to be there, to start to see a whole system really working in relationship with one another, so that everyone is benefiting. And by choosing, I think my experience is you can choose any theme. Food is always a good one. Economy is always a generative one as well. But also community or education or health. You've mentioned those already. Any of those combinations.
And a fascinating one I started to think about the other day is housing. I just started to think about, so take a family and imagine that family doesn't have secure housing. What's the cost to a society of a family not being secure in their home? It's huge.
Huge.
It's huge. Like if we started to do the calculations of the value just at that level of the cost of not doing it.
Yeah.
So then imagine, instead of us all having to get mortgages to get our house, we have to save up for a deposit, and that's very difficult for many people today. And then borrow a lot of money from the bank, and you're totally at the bank's whim then, as I discovered when I signed my mortgage agreement just a couple of years ago. It's like, wow, look at what I'm signing. If everyone else wasn't doing it at the same time, I would never sign that document, frankly.
Right. Yeah.
Actually. But supposing, and we haven't worked out all the details of this, but I'm pretty sure that this could work, that somebody could invest in somebody else being housed, and the value that is generated by that family being safe would produce a greater return to the investor than buying the house and renting it. And over time, you could end up with an investor having a better return and a family being housed in their own home. To me, that is just such a beautiful model compared to what we have at the moment, where people pay rents, they're forever in hock, basically, to somebody else to be able to be safe, and they can be thrown out at any time if they're renting. If they have a mortgage, there's this constant pressure, interest rates and keeping your job and all of that. It's just such a difficult system around something that's so fundamental to society, that people are safely housed.
Yeah, I think what I hear in these ideas is that kind of relating to the common.
Yes.
There's a new interest in the commons and Eleanor Ostrom's work and some of the pro-social approaches. And I think this is really interesting and overlaps on the kind of governance explorations that we're both doing. So it's almost like we've reached a threshold point where humans are able to hold the possibility of commons being not just something that intercedes around competitiveness or gives us an alternative to really command and control kinds of ownerships. And what we need is living systems that breathe and flow with not only individual capacities for beauty, but how can we do that together? And I really think that these are really exciting opportunities. I think that maybe we've opened up a conversation today, Sarah, that could have a few more to follow on as we simmer and think about what we raised in each other's consciousness around.
Yeah.
The question.
There's something I want to just mention in relation to the commons, because we talk a lot about the commons. And it's really clear to me, and I think would be clear to any human being if they're just sitting in their natural kind of human state, that things like the air that we breathe and the water that we drink, and the soil actually that we grow food in, really and truly belongs in the common. Like I always think of the commonwealth, that's part of the commonwealth, not the commonwealth as a kind of part of the monarchy, but the commonwealth of not only human beings, but it's the kind of commonwealth of nature. And there are moves afoot. There are companies being formed with the intention of them literally owning all of that and all of the products of nature in a region, everything, which is the opposite of what we've been talking about. And I don't, in a way, want to bring in something that feels very threatening so close to the end of the conversation, but I think it's important for us to recognize the difference between the recognition of commons and the denial of the commons, because the private ownership model that we run at the moment leads towards the denial of the commons, which means ultimately that whole countries could pretty much be taken over by private corporations, taking the proceeds of their ecology. So what we're talking about is something that is fundamental to our well-being, to our future, and to the quality of life on this planet. And so we really are at a very important moment where I think we get to choose the direction we go. Do we go in the direction of caring, of sharing, like sharing this common wealth? Do we recognize that nature, we're in it, it doesn't belong to us, but there is a wealth that is available to all of us and to it within that? Do we take that route? I don't think it's a choice, do we take that one or that one? It's just, do we take that one? Maybe there's a better one.
Well, the image that you're bringing to mind is an ownership of this chunk of Gaia. How does Gaia feel about that?
Quite.
Actually, my shoulder is mine. It's not yours. and it does remind me of Vandana Shiva's work and the ownership of the DNA in a seed, which she has been defending, since it was first attempted. And I think she would look at this and say, well, it's just a fractal. That seed is a fractal of all of the living systems that emerge from it. And as you say, the ecosystem. So for me, I think it is this approach to commoning that is a common wealth, a common beauty, truth, and goodness, even.
Which is a beautiful wealth.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Versus some kind of way to own it, which means putting some kind of a boundary around it that doesn't allow for the free flowing of, I think, life. Personally, I just don't think there is I think the choice is obvious to me, if it isn't to others.
Yes, the choice is obvious to me. And when I look at the ants on my farm, I'm fully aware that I do not own them. I can pretend that I own the land, but what does that actually mean? Like, I definitely don't own the ants, and I don't own the worms, and the soil does whatever it does, and the plants do whatever they do, and the seeds fly wherever they fly. It's like, it actually just doesn't really work that way. So yes, I'm with you. The choice is clear. It's a kind of non-choice choice. And I'd like to thank you, actually, Marilyn, because I've never thought of a city as an organ. I always see human beings as the cells of Earth or of Gaia. I never saw the cities as organs. And that's such a beautiful image. And there are many conversations we could have about healthy organs and how do we create healthy organ systems and how do the organs relate with each other. Which we don't have time for today, but I agree with you that there's a lot to explore in here. So I'd really like to thank you for joining me in this shared public conversation, and look forward to more to come, and look forward to the world where cities are regenerative and our economy is regenerative. And I read a definition the other day, which is actually of the word syntropic, which is perhaps a word beyond regenerative, but it's like everything you touch is better for it. It's like, how could we live like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's a perfect question to leave us in this conversation. And I also would love to have more, and who knows what we'll discover and invite others into, because it will become common knowledge, hopefully.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Have a great day.